What's going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guys, Cody and Derek, back for another episode, guys. And the NFL schedule got released a few days ago. The Colts have their schedule now. I believe it was the fourth easiest schedule according to records last year. But we wanted to kind of talk about and look at every single game and kind of rank from the hardest ones we feel like the hardest opponents the Colts will have to face to the least difficult, the easiest opponents the Colts will have to face. We wanted to go walk, kind of run through, give a quick kind of thought on why we have this, specific game, ranked where we do. And so that's kind of what we're going to be doing. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. Let's jump right in. Let's start with the most difficult game that we would say the Colts are probably going to have to face here in 2023. What would you say, Derek? What is that?
Yeah, it will probably end up being the Cincinnati Bengals for a lot of reasons. Of course, Cincinnati, who's gone to the Eastern Conference Championship or the AFC Conference Championship 2 times, gone to a Super Bowl just recently. Obviously with Joe Burrow and that offense and the way that they're doing things over there, no doubt that the Bengals have really turned themselves into a dynamic powerhouse here in the AFC as over the last several years with all the talent they've accumulated. And then, of course, that defense has been playing extremely well despite some of the turnover that they've had. They've continued to have guys that defy expectations. So, I mean, the bank, especially being in Cincinnati, it's barely even a road trip for Indy, but again, being in the cold and that kind of environment, it's Cincinnati's home turf, and that will definitely be one of the more difficult ones to deal with.
Right. It's right smack dab in the middle of December 10th in Cincinnati, outdoors. That's going to be tough. Cincinnati, we would say outside of Kansas City, is probably the best team in the AFC. So, that's going to be certainly a great test for Indianapolis. Can they, I'm not even concerned if Indy can beat them. Can they hang with them? Could they hang with Cincinnati potentially? If they can, maybe that makes you feel really good sitting there, wherever you are. Anthony Richardson has some more snaps and stuff. If you're competing with teams like Cincinnati with Anthony Richardson, I think that gives you a lot of hope going into next year. Or even like if you're making a playoff push, like, hey, we can actually compete with these teams. So that'll be a good barometer on kind of where the Colts are, I think. But it's going to be a tough game. And I'm glad it's, towards the end of the season as opposed to the beginning of the season, because I think you're going to see kind of two different kinds of Colts teams, right? Just from the fact of, Anthony Richardson and where he's at and where some of these young guys are at, the chemistry they have on offense, things of that nature. Shane Steichen, have a little bit more of a influence, if you will, kind of being in season a little bit more. So, but certainly, yeah, you're right. This is going to be the most difficult game, I think. And I don't really think I think it's kind of a decent gap from 1 to 2 here. For the fact that, Cincinnati, what they've done, the fact that they've been to a Super Bowl, the fact that they have, one of the top quarterbacks in the league, and, they've done it for a couple of years now, and they're going to be, looking probably to lock up one of the top seeds in the AFC at that point. So, yeah, certainly a game is in Cincinnati. Like that just adds to how difficult it truly will be, in that hostile environment. So I definitely agree with you there. Cincinnati is clear cut for me, the number one here. And I don't think it's relatively close, to be honest with you. But let's move on now to the second most difficult game that we would say. It's another game in the AFC North. Fortunately, I guess, for the Colts, the weather won't be as nasty as it probably would be in Cincinnati. But going to Baltimore, the Indianapolis Colts will have to face Lamar Jackson, have to face this new look Ravens offense. And we know, how good the Ravens can be if Lamar, and you think that early in the season, Lamar will be pretty healthy at that point. So you do think that it's going to be a tough matchup right away for Indianapolis, especially this young team in the Colts that are figuring themselves out. To go into a hostile environment like that, it's going to be tough, Derek.
Yeah, absolutely. I could make an argument on why this potentially could be the hardest matchup for the Indianapolis Colts because it's week 3. It's going to be one of those situations. Anthony Richardson's not going to be ready by that time. So, it could be one of those situations where, the Bengals might actually be an easier opponent to some people because at least then you're over halfway through the season, and Anthony Richardson has had a lot of snaps. He's had a lot of time to get better. Week 3, he's going to be thrown into a really hostile environment. Being in Baltimore is not an easy task. And, with Lamar being back and now having more weapons, we saw what the Ravens did to us in 2021 when, the defense just absolutely failed us in the second half. Even with a great offensive turnout that we had, you can never outdo Lamar Jackson if you're not careful. So it's going to be a really tough one because it's week 3. Team is still itching to get better, still learning Shane Steichen's system. So how do they respond to another really tough AFC North competitor with Baltimore? I mean, it's going to be a tough challenge.
For sure. Yeah. I think, going to Cincinnati and going to Baltimore, those are real tough games. Really, any AFC North team, when you travel there, it's tough weather. It's tough to win there. So yeah, Baltimore certainly one of the more tougher places to go in and pull out a victory. So that's number 2 for us. I think number 3 though, Derek, I mean, we have to say it just because the fact the Colts haven't won there since I think we were graduating.
You and I were still in high school last time.
So Jacksonville, the Colts have not beaten that division opponent in, it's closing in on a decade now. It's getting crazy. It's getting ridiculous. But Colts have really struggled in Jacksonville. It doesn't matter, Derek, even if the Colts were a playoff team and Jacksonville was the worst team, the Colts still could not beat them in Jacksonville. It really gives me the vibes of for whatever reason, like when New England would go to Miami, and they would just it didn't matter how good New England was and how bad Miami was. Miami would just pull out these wins. But more recently, now with Jacksonville being where they are with Trevor Lawrence and all that stuff, I mean, it's getting worse. It's been getting worse recently. And we just saw, how the Colts season ended in 2021, in Jacksonville. We saw what happened last year in Jacksonville. The Colts didn't even score a point. It's getting to this point, man, where it's utterly ridiculous. The Colts have not done anything offensively the last 2 times they've been in Jacksonville. And, we all know how tough it is to win down there. And we've said it, Derek. We said it years ago. Until the Colts prove us wrong and win in Jacksonville, we're not going to pick them to win. We just aren't, right? And this one happens, week 6, 1:00. So it's going to be a tough one, man. It's going to be really tough. And the Colts are going to have their work cut out for them trying to beat a Jacksonville team that I think we could all say probably right now, they're a better team than Indianapolis. So that makes it even tougher.
Yeah, I mean, Jacksonville, just take what Jacksonville has become over the last half of the season and what we saw from them in the playoffs. I mean, that's a team that's dangerous, and it seems to only be getting better with their new leadership and Trevor Lawrence getting better and getting new weapons this next year in Calvin Ridley. So, I mean, on top of the curse of Indy going to Jacksonville and not being able to win, now the team just seems to be getting better and better and better. So it makes it even harder, like you said. The only thing we can hope for is that, Shane Steichen will have this team in a better state of mind for, going into halfway through the season. Obviously, the Colts will have 2 home games before this, so they have some time to kind of clean some things up, kind of get some guys back to being a little more healthy, being closer to home. So that's kind of a good thing before you go into this road trip. But, I mean, nevertheless, it's still, yes, you still have to go with that Jacksonville haven't won there in a decade. It's still going to be one of the more difficult opponents, especially since, it's really odd saying that Jacksonville is a tough opponent now, but they are. They're one of the better teams in the NFL from this last year. So we have to give them respect where it's due.
Yeah, and the fact that you're going to already see Jacksonville in week 1, I mean, you're going to have a better idea about this football team going into that game. So it's not like it's your first time seeing them all year, right? You're going to have an opportunity. Like last year, the Colts went to Jacksonville pretty early, and they didn't know what kind of team they had in Jacksonville they were facing. But the good thing is, with Indianapolis, especially if they're able to beat them in week 1 for somehow in Indy, they're going to have the confidence we could do that, And if this was a Frank Reich led team, man, I'd have a lot. Not that I'm picking them to win, but there's a slight glimmer of hope. Maybe Shane Steichen gets this team in the right mindset, and they can go down there and they could do something. But again, I'm not going to pick them till they finish it out and they figure it out. And so I guess that's the good news of like they're going to have some tape on this current Jacksonville team this year by seeing them week 1, and we'll see what happens there. But yeah, that's going to be a real tough one until Indy proves us wrong. We're not going to pick them, so it's going to be tough for them to win in that one. I think another one that probably, Derek, if it was actually at this location, we'd probably have it a little bit higher. But the fact that it's going to be kind of played on a neutral site, technically at the Patriots in Germany, that's going to be an interesting game. I mean, I think it's difficult because you're facing one of the best, if not the best coach of all time, especially on the defensive side of things in Bill Belichick. And, they added another defensive player. We already know, we saw firsthand what they did to you last year in New England. And, obviously we hope that, have a little bit of a better offense than last year, but still, it's going to be tough to beat New England, technically on the road, not at home, against Bill Belichick in this defense. And then also what they did add in the draft as well. It's going to be a tough one for Indianapolis to go in here and beat them, here in Germany.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those situations where Bill Belichick has been known to, not lose very often to rookie quarterbacks. And it's, even if it's going to be in that situation where they're, halfway through the season, it doesn't matter. It's going to be a game international, halfway across the world. I mean, that's difficult for a lot of people, to deal with. I mean, there's a ton of players and coaches that say they hate doing it. Obviously, the experience of it is fun. You enjoy going and experiencing new things. But in regards to like, getting yourself mentally prepared for a football game, that's one of the most difficult things you can do, having to fly, over a dozen hours to, a destination in Europe and then a place you've never been before and where things are a lot different. And then, playing that and then having to fly all the way back. But thankfully for the Indianapolis Colts, they got a bye week after that game. So they got a lot more time to get back to earth, when it comes to Indianapolis. But that'll be a difficult one because it's technically a road game for the Indianapolis Colts, which is kind of funny. But, again, young team going on the road, far away from the road, to go to another country to play football. That's going to be a difficult game for anyone to have to deal with.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. The fact that like we saw what they did to Sam Ellinger last year, right? How they were able to confuse him and really just, not allow him to get going at all. And that not just him, but the fact that Bill Belichick's done that with so many different rookie quarterbacks over the years. I mean, it wouldn't be shocking at all to see New England just completely shut down this offense. That's just kind of what they do with rookie quarterbacks. But it'll be interesting nonetheless. Another game, we're going to move now to actually the first, I believe, home game is on this list as the most difficult. We're actually going to go with the Cleveland Browns here. And I know some people are like, Cleveland, they were terrible last year. But here's the deal, Derek. I do feel like Cleveland massively underachieved last year. There was some weirdness, obviously, with the Deshaun Watson stuff. He didn't have the full offseason, all that stuff. But he still is a very talented player. And, like, I'm not going to just write him off. And Cleveland still has a lot of talent on that football team as well. So I think they're definitely one of the teams that, like, I think they could easily put up a lot of points against you pretty quickly with that kind of caliber of offense they have. Talk to me about this Cleveland game here.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong when you say that they underachieved last year. Deshaun Watson, who hadn't played football for 2 years, now all of a sudden is thrown in halfway through the season and expected to just pick right back up when he wasn't even allowed to practice with the team until training camp from last year. So he didn't have a lot of time to build a connection with these guys and to get things straight. And then on top of it, the first game he returns, they face the Houston Texans. I mean, you got to imagine that his mind was not in a good place for obvious reasons. So Cleveland as a team, has had its struggles, but I think this year Deshaun Watson comes back to a lot more of his original being because, remember before he quit, playing for the Texans and moving on, I mean, this guy was pretty much a top 5 quarterback at the time when he was playing and at his best. So if he even returns to over half of that form, he's going to be an above average to really good quarterback. And the Cleveland roster is one of the more well-built rosters that's out there. I mean, they have great defensive linemen, amazing defensive linemen. They got a great secondary. They have some wide receivers. Their offensive line is well built. Nick Chubb will run it down your throat, no questions asked. It's really difficult to game plan against Cleveland because they have so many different ways they can beat you. Um, I know a ton of people have no respect for the Browns, but I do. The Browns are one of those teams in any given week that they can just absolutely tear you apart if you don't slow them down.
Yeah. For sure. There's a lot of talent there, and just have a feeling that they may be due for a bounce back year. So just for the talent alone and the potential they can do, I think that could be a really difficult matchup for Indy, all the way around, because you talk about their defensive line. The Colts offensive line struggled last year. How are you going to contain Myles Garrett? How are you going to contain these guys? And can your receivers get open on this secondary? Like, there's a lot of talent in this Cleveland room. So I think they definitely are due for a bounce back year. All right, let's move on to another one here. The Colts face the Rams. Talk about another team back-to-back here. Two teams that really we felt like underachieved last year. Now, the Rams was more due, I felt like, to some injuries, especially to Matthew Stafford and some of these other guys. But they just really, were a team that you're like, how in the world did they go from what they did a couple of years ago to winning the Super Bowl to where they are now? And just really, really underachieved in so many different ways. So many things didn't go their way last year. But the fact that they were a Super Bowl team only a couple of years ago, they still have Matthew Stafford, who's, they think is probably going to get back to, pretty close to 100%. They have some talent. They have experience. This is just a tough game in general because the Rams are still extremely talented in a lot of areas.
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, I just talked about Deshaun Watson having a resurgence. People are sleeping on Matt Stafford, bro. I mean, I'm telling you, Matt Stafford can still fling it. Okay, he had that injury all last year that made it really difficult. If he stays upright, that he can still tear apart this Colts defense. Absolutely can. We've seen him do it once before. He can do it again. Uh, they may not have Jalen Ramsey anymore. They may not have Leonard Floyd anymore or Von Miller anymore. They still got Aaron Donald. They still got some studs over there on that defense. And then you have to still deal with Cooper Kupp and Sean McVay calling the plays. So nothing is to get put past the Rams. I think last year they had some really bad issues. And obviously, they had some time to try and figure it out. But as long as their quarterback remains healthy, the Rams are a threat against anyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. Moving on now, let's keep going here because I know we have still a good amount of teams to go here. But I would say also, I don't know if I would agree with this necessarily. You had the Panthers next and then the Saints. I'd probably flip-flop that. I understand that it's going to be in Carolina, but I just look at the Saints as like, they've just been a good roster with some bad quarterback play the last couple of years. And I just look at that and I say they have so much talent on that team. For me, I know, there's a difference in being home versus being away, but Carolina to me is just not a good football team still. They have a rookie quarterback. So for me, I'm going to flip-flop those. I'm going to go Saints, then probably Panthers. Why do you say Panthers and then Saints, though, out of curiosity?
Well, obviously, if this was Saints on the road, then I'm 100% agreeing with you. If it was Saints on the road, I'd probably have it as my fourth toughest game because Indy playing in New Orleans just is never a good thing. It's never a good time. Always bad times in New Orleans for Indy. But I think outside of Derek Carr, what we got going on right now is there's just much more of a media outline for the Carolina game than what there is for New Orleans. Obviously, Derek Carr being in New Orleans, they have a great, obviously the quarterback situation is good there. They have some weapons. Their defense has a few good parts to it still. But I just think that from an understanding of what the stakes of the Carolina game, right? Because they have Bryce Young, right? They upgraded their offensive roster, and then adding to the fact that your former coach is now coaching that team. From a mindset standpoint, I can see why that might be a little bit more difficult for some of these guys, understanding the circumstances surrounding it. So maybe that's what it is. It may not be the fact that the Saints probably are a better team on paper than Carolina, and most people assume that the Saints can go to the playoffs this year with Derek Carr. But I'm saying from the mental warfare aspect of this, I think the Panthers are a more difficult matchup. And then, of course, again, being on the road, being in Carolina does help it a little bit in Carolina's sake. So that's why I would probably put the Panthers above the Saints for that reason.
Okay. Yeah, and again, I mean, like you said, like I just feel like New Orleans, they have their quarterback now. Derek Carr's done actually pretty good against Indianapolis for the most part. So, because does he have another really good game against Indy now with some upgraded weapons, some upgraded, just an upgraded team, I guess, maybe not even the weapons, but just an upgraded team in general. Like, if he does his part, that could be a really tough game because New Orleans still has talent all throughout their roster. So, we'll see on that one, but I definitely get what you're saying. And that's probably honestly why I put Carolina over Pittsburgh, even though the Colts have struggled against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is at home this year again, second straight year the Colts will play them. But I just felt like, Derek, if the Colts had a halfway competent offense last year, they would have taken care of business against Pittsburgh. It's just the fact that they literally could not do anything offensively, like every game last year. And that really was the difference. And I felt like the Colts had pretty much the Steelers on lockdown on defense for the most part the whole game. There was a few times that they had some issues, but I really feel like, Pittsburgh, they're still a young team. They're figuring it out. They have some talent, certainly. But I just feel like, the fact that I feel like Pittsburgh's probably a better team right now than Carolina. They're both still young and inexperienced. They both have young, rookie or second year quarterbacks. But the fact that it is in Carolina, I think I agree with you there. That's why I slightly put it ahead of Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh's a game that you've struggled as well to beat Pittsburgh. So I can't, I have to have it decently high up on this list as well, even though I don't think Pittsburgh necessarily a great team. Just another year of Kenny Pickett, another year of them growing together. You already have some pretty good wide receivers there, pretty good weapons on the offense. So I would put Pittsburgh there, right after Carolina. I know you probably have Pittsburgh there as well. You just have it flip-flop, Panthers, Saints, and I go Saints, Panthers. So talk to me about Pittsburgh as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, the Steelers, another team that Indy always struggles to beat. Even last year we should have, but as you said, I mean, second half quarterback play was terrible. We had been past Matt Ryan at that point, and Jelani Woods had his best game. The defense realistically only gave up like 13 points if it wasn't for the fact that the offense was so crap. Uh, Again, like I think this year, obviously the Steelers improved in some areas, but when it comes to like this group in total, I think that the Colts could still potentially beat the Steelers if all things go correctly the way that they needed to. But we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. For sure, we will. All right, let's move on to the next game. And, probably a couple years ago, this game would have been a little bit higher. But the Raiders, we're facing the Raiders. The Raiders still have some good weapons, but they definitely did. We would say, I don't know, depends how you feel, but I feel like they downgraded from Derek Carr to Jimmy G. People will point to Jimmy G, leading the 49ers to, some playoff wins and stuff like that. But for me, I just kind of look at it as like he's an average quarterback. It's at home. He hasn't really ever done anything against Indy, to my knowledge. I don't really feel like, I know we haven't played him a ton, but he doesn't really I guess I'm probably more scared of Derek Carr on the Raiders than I am Jimmy G on the Raiders. But they do still have guys like Devontae Adams, who we know he's going to get his share. He's going to get his targets. They have Josh Jacobs, Hunter Renfrow, who's killed the Colts in the past. They still have Max Crosby. So there's still some talent on this Raiders team. Talk to me about why you have them here as well, as one of these kind of the middle of the pack in terms of difficulty here.
Yeah, when it comes to the Raiders, I mean, like you said, Jimmy G, it's kind of a weird scenario that we find ourselves in when it comes to this. And Derek Carr is a little bit different than Jimmy G, just from a sense of Derek Carr's best game is better than Jimmy G's best game, but Derek Carr's worst game is usually a lot worse than Jimmy G's game. So, like, Jimmy G's a lot more standard. It's a lot more consistent and constant. But I mean, still at the end of the day, the Raiders can't ever put him away, dude, because we always have that issue. Josh Jacobs just coming off his best season. He was the best running back in the NFL last year. Devontae Adams still being there. If it wasn't for Stephon Gilmore, being the guy against Devontae Adams last year, the Raiders beat us in that game. And at the end of the day, we don't really have that guy in the backfield right now, right? So it's kind of one of those situations where, yeah, Josh McDaniels had a bad year last year, but the Colts and the Raiders have a long history, and especially recently, and we keep going back and forth. So we beat them last year. I keep saying this, that like the Raiders and the Colts like to trade blows. So don't be surprised if this is a trap game where the Colts should win it, but they don't.
Right. All right, let's keep moving here. We actually have Jacksonville again, this time at home. I think just simply for the fact, Derek, that Jacksonville did win the division. They are a team that, even last year at home, it was a really tightly contested contest until Alec Pierce had the walk-off touchdown. So it's going to be a tough game. It's going to be a dogfight. We know this. Jacksonville has, in the past, come into Indianapolis and won, so it's definitely not a given at all. But it's going to be a very interesting contest nonetheless. It's going to be week one. It's going to be interesting to see Anthony Richardson versus this defense of Jacksonville if he does start, or Gardner Minshew. There's going to be storylines either way, but it's going to be interesting to see, kind of like Anthony Richardson potential coming out party here against the, AFC South winners, basically. So.
Yep. I mean, again, Jacksonville is this high on the list again, just for the fact that, again, it's week one. Everything's going to be rusty, and Jacksonville's a good team. So, it's going to be one of those games where it's going to be difficult for Indy to win, but it might be one of the more important ones if they're trying to salvage the season because, if you're at home at least for this week one matchup, so it gives you a better opportunity that they have to travel and be at your home stadium versus, you being at theirs.
Right. And even when you were terrible last year, I mean, Matt Ryan had his best game as a Colt last year against this Jacksonville defense. So you do think, okay, if you can give Anthony Richardson some time, he could maybe do some damage against this Jacksonville defense. I mean, Matt Ryan was awful last year and still was able to carve up this Jacksonville defense. So it does give you some hope that maybe potentially that could be something that could happen. They do kind of struggle against the pass. They did last year a good amount. So, yeah, definitely it is going to be a difficult game just for the fact that it is Jacksonville and what they've done, but definitely feel like it's a winnable game here for the Colts in week one. Again, it's winnable, but we'll see what they do with it. All right, let's move on now to the third divisional game that we're talking about on this list. This one at Tennessee. We know the Titans. We've had some history. We've been, unfortunately, on the wrong side of that history the last couple of years, where Tennessee's kind of just done whatever they wanted and beat Indianapolis a lot. But, the start of a new era, Tennessee kind of seems like they're on the downward spiral a little bit. Their trajectory is definitely pointing down, where a lot of people think Indy's is pointing up a little bit more. We don't know at all, Derek, what their quarterback situation is going to look like. Is it going to be Tannehill? Is it going to be Will Levis? Is it going to be Malik Willis? We don't know who their starting quarterback is going to be in this game, which I think will be definitely interesting for sure. And I guess it'll probably be a little bit more clear because this is a week 13 game, be a little bit more clear maybe who their starting quarterback, or maybe if, Tannehill's struggling, maybe this is like around the time where Will Levis gets his chance. So you see rookie versus rookie. But again, we don't know. We think Tennessee's probably not going to be that great this year, but you never know. Mike Vrabel, I still believe, is a very good head coach. I think he's going to have his guys ready regardless of how talented or not talented they are. So talk to me about this Tennessee game and why we have it here as, maybe a decently difficult game for Indianapolis.
Yeah, I mean, again, having to go up against Derrick Henry is always a difficult aspect in this format. But like you said, I mean, Tennessee just falls down this list for a bunch of different reasons, just because, with the quarterback situation, we may not know who it is. And regardless of how it goes, I mean, Indy should have won several times against Tennessee this year. Just, again, awful quarterback play and just bad coaching, figuring things out. So I think the Colts will be in a much better situation to take advantage of the very bad defensive moves that the Titans have made over the offseason and then take advantage of this quarterback controversy that they're having.
Right, for sure. All right, the next game we have is a road game against the Atlanta Falcons, who I have no idea what the Falcons are, man. Sometimes Desmond Ridder looks really, really solid, looks like he could potentially be something, and then sometimes you just scratch your head and you're like, what in the world? On paper, Atlanta does have some good pieces on offense, right? They have, Bijan Robinson, who they just drafted. They have Kyle Pitts, who they drafted in 21. They have Drake London. Like, they have some pieces here, but I just don't feel like this Atlanta team is really all together as a 53-man roster. I don't feel like it's a great team. So you go into it, go to Atlanta, not really, weather's not going to be a factor at all. You go into kind of a dome sort of setting, which you're pretty used to as a Colts, as this team, and you play in that all the time. And not really a great team in Atlanta, unless Desmond Ridder just lights the world on fire this year, which remains to be seen. But I don't think we're as high on maybe this Atlanta team as maybe some teams are right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to be high on Atlanta right now. I mean, especially when they're coaching, when they're coached by Arthur Smith, who, we heard reports of how dumb his interview process was with some of these players. And of course, I don't think Arthur Smith's a great coach, and they still have a lot of issues. Falcons have a lot of issues. Their defense still has a lot of overhaul that needs to be changed. Their quarterback is Desmond Ridder right now, which I don't have a lot of confidence in. So Atlanta definitely is going to be further down this list, even after all the moves that they have made.
Yep. All right, we're going to kind of close it out here because we have, we have what, 4 more games to talk about here. And the crazy thing is 3 of those are divisional games. We have the second matchup with Tennessee. And this one is at home. The second matchup with Tennessee is at home. Tennessee actually has, done pretty well in Indianapolis the last couple of years. But like we mentioned, at the front, I think we can kind of say like the Colts have a good chance here at home to take care of business against Tennessee for the first time in a while. And then we have back-to-back games against Houston as some of the least ones. Obviously it'll be interesting to see the number 1 and number 3 pick play each other, but we have road versus Houston. It's always more difficult to go travel, and then home versus Houston. And then we round it out with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as well. Talk to me about some of these games here, Derek.
Yeah, I mean, again, Titans, we talked about it. Being at home, I think the Colts will have a good chance of beating the Titans there. Houston, I mean, we disrespect Houston a little bit right now, but that's just how we kind of always have felt about them. Well, come to find out, I mean, it could be quite possible. We might have to replace the Houston games with the Tennessee games at some point. Who knows? I mean, Houston made some really great moves. Until we know how good they become with CJ Stroud and being coached by DeMeco Ryans, they're still going to be further down when it comes to that. And then, obviously the last game that we're going to talk about, and that is, against Tampa. I would definitely say that's one of the easiest games, might be the easiest because, again, you're coming off of the bye week for Indy, so you have more time to diversify a game plan for that and get healthier. So that's great. And then, of course, you're facing a team that has a serious issue at quarterback. They've lost some guys both on the offensive line and on the defense this year. We've heard Devin White say he wants out. Being coached. I mean, Todd Bowles does the best he can for, that team, but he's certainly no Bruce Arians, and whatever quarterback they roll with at that time of the year is certainly no Tom Brady. So, just the team that it was just even a year ago versus what it is now, it's just not the same. It's just not the same kind of team right now in a lot of different aspects. So, being at home, you get 2 weeks to prepare, get healthier, and face a team that is clearly on the decline. That's 100% one of the easier games for the Colts on their schedule.
I think Tampa, I think Arizona and Tampa are probably going to be fighting for that number 1 overall pick. If I was guessing right now, again, this is months and months before the season, I would say Tampa is probably one of those teams that's going to be fighting for Caleb Williams' services, in the upcoming draft here. So it's going to be one that, I don't really think any of the quarterbacks they have, Baker or Kyle Trask, really struck fear into anybody. And, like you said, they lost a lot of talent over the last couple of years. They lost a really good coach. I don't really feel like Todd Bowles is a great coach, to be honest with you. So there's really not a whole lot there for Tampa to look forward to this year. Again, unless one of these guys completely lights the world on fire, which I don't foresee happening, that would only be the only reason why you'd maybe move it up. But I definitely think, like, based off of, kind of the things that have happened, this year with Brady leaving, with all these guys, all this stuff changing here in Tampa, I think they're definitely due for a not great season. They traded kind of their future or their future for Tom Brady, and they're going to kind of pay the price a little bit here in the next year or so. So we'll see how that does pan out for them this year. But I definitely think that will be one that's tough. And then, Houston, they did beat Indianapolis, but you do think, like, Indianapolis was a shell of what it was or what it should have been last year. And it really was a freak thing that even happened for the fact that Houston did beat Indianapolis. So do you think, until proven wrong, which they really could, because I think DeMeco Ryans is a really good coach, I think we have to put them here for now, considering they were one of the worst teams in the AFC last year, and the Colts ended up being the worst team in the AFC last year. But I do think with Shane Steichen, kind of a renewed vision, it may be a little bit less of a competition than it was last year. Hopefully, again, we'll see. CJ Stroud and Will Anderson and these guys, they could get these guys ready, and they could really, maybe go on a run or do some things well. But until proven different, we will stick with this right now. But guys, let us know your thoughts on the Colts schedule. Do you agree with us on some of these? I'm sure some people will disagree on kind of the difficulty of certain games, right? We kind of explained why we thought we ranked them the way that we did. Let us know what you agree with, what you disagree with. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Really appreciate your support. And as always, guys, go Colts.